A Soviet spy took out a coin, then disassembled a razor, removed the blade, and wrapped it in a matchbox. He then pried the coin open in the middle, obtaining a piece of encrypted intelligence. He then used a magnifying device to read the information, but just then, the FBI suddenly burst in. The Soviet spy remained unfazed, disguised as a bald, middle-aged man. Facing the FBI's guns, he calmly put on his dentures and then asked to clean his palate. Seeing that he was unarmed, the FBI agents handed him the palette. The spy then casually picked up the encrypted paper with a rag and silently destroyed the intelligence right under their noses. The agents then searched the entire room, but found no evidence. However, the FBI had already confirmed his identity as Rudolf Fable, the Soviet spy with 1,000 faces. At the age of 20, he was fluent in 6 languages and had performed numerous heroic deeds during World War II. Although the FBI lacked sufficient evidence to prove that Abel was a Soviet spy, he still had to stand trial to demonstrate the fairness and impartiality of American law. The FBI provided Abel with a lawyer. However, Donald usually only handled commercial insurance cases and had no experience with criminal defense cases. Clearly, the FBI had only one goal: to sentence Abel to death. However, Donner was a lawyer with professional integrity. He immediately went to the prison to inform Abel that he would conduct the defense without bias. Although he knew that defending an enemy spy would bring him condemnation regardless of the outcome, he still resolutely took on the case. He then found the judge and applied for a postponement, legally requesting 6 weeks to gather evidence. But this was during World War II and Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union used ideology as a weapon, a crucial point in the confrontation between the two countries. Donner's actions were undoubtedly considered treasonous. The judge decisively rejected his request, and from then on, Donner faced constant trouble. On his way home, he was followed by a mysterious man. The man kept checking a photograph. Donner sensed something was wrong, so he immediately quickened his pace and hid behind a car. But when he looked back, the man had already appeared behind him. Donner had no choice but to go to a bar with him. The man then revealed his identity. He was a CIA agent. He had come to warn Donner not to cause any trouble, to end the defense quickly, and not to threaten national security. But Donner firmly believed that nothing could override the law, so he smiled and refused the CIA agent, and Donner's troubles followed one after another. The CIA published news in the newspaper that Donner was going to defend an enemy spy. This made him a target of public hatred. People looked at him with hostility. Not only that, one night, while Donner's daughter was watching television, someone fired shots from outside the window. Fortunately, no one was injured. For the safety of his family, his wife urged him to abandon the defense, but Donald, based on his professional ethics as a lawyer, insisted on defending Abel. By reviewing the evidence, he discovered that the FBI only had a legal detention order, but no search warrant issued based on suspicion of a crime. This meant that the evidence the FBI had gathered not only failed to prove that Abel was a spy, but was also obtained illegally and was tainted and should not be recognized by the judiciary. However, the judge believed that Abel was an illegal immigrant and could not be fairly tried under American law. After the trial began, the jury unanimously agreed that Abel should be sentenced to death. Donald wanted to appeal to overturn the guilty verdict, but the judge immediately rejected the request. Sentencing would be announced 3 days later. Although Donald failed to secure Abel's rights, Abel had already come to terms with death. Both men adhered to their principles. One endured various tortures without yielding. The other risked his reputation for the sake of his professional ethics. This led to mutual admiration between the two. Before the verdict was announced, Donner privately approached the judge again and presented a new defense argument. He argued that the course of action most in America's interest was to sentence Abel to life imprisonment. If an American spy were captured by the Soviet Union, then an exchange could be arranged. Donner successfully persuaded the judge with this argument. Subsequently, the judge announced in court that Abel was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Through Donner's efforts and persistence, this Soviet master spy avoided the electric chair. But Donner also became a public enemy, despised and reviled by everyone. Abel thought he would spend the rest of his life in prison, but soon things took a turn for the better. An American pilot flying a U-2 reconnaissance plane was shot down by a missile over Soviet airspace. The pilot dared not activate the self-destruct device and was eventually captured by the Soviets. After the CIA learned of this information, they contacted lawyer Donner again, hoping he would go to the Soviet Union to negotiate. This was a game between top-level negotiators, and successfully exchanging prisoners would undoubtedly be extremely difficult. In 1957, over Soviet airspace. An American U-2 reconnaissance plane was carrying out a surveillance mission with high-definition cameras, but the pilot suddenly panicked when he saw a missile approaching, which hit the wing. The reconnaissance plane instantly lost control, trailing black smoke as it plummeted rapidly downwards. The pilot, fearing for his life, dared not activate the self-destruct mechanism. He was ultimately sucked out of the cockpit by the powerful airflow, but fortunately, he was caught by a safety rope because the U-2 reconnaissance plane was highly classified and could not fall into Soviet hands. He summoned his courage and attempted to climb back and to activate the self-destruct device, but at the crucial moment, the safety rope broke, and the pilot was thrown out. He could only open his parachute to escape and was ultimately captured by the Soviets and brought before a military court, where he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. When the US military learned that the reconnaissance plane had been shot down by the Soviets, they feared the pilot would review to reconnaissance plane specifications, so they immediately contacted lawyer Donald, hoping he would go to East Germany to negotiate, exchanging the Soviet master spy Rudolf Fabel for the American pilot. Due to the highly volatile situation in East Germany at the time, the Soviet Union had firm control over East Germany to prevent East German residents from fleeing to West Germany. They even built the Berlin Wall, over 4 meters high. An American student studying in Germany tried to photograph the scene with his camera, but was arrested by the East German State Security Service as a spy and sentenced to death after being brought before a military court. After the CIA received this intelligence, they believed the Soviets definitely had ulterior motives. Exchanging a worthless student for the master spy Abel was a bad deal. The agents instructed Donner to stand firm, to disregard the insignificant student, and only focus on getting the pilot back. Subsequently, under the agents' arrangements, Donner, using a pre-prepared pass, successfully crossed the Berlin Wall from West Germany and arrived at the Soviet embassy. However, the Soviet diplomats did not meet with him. Instead, they sent agents disguised as Abel's family members to try and extract some useful information. But Donner, as a professional lawyer, immediately saw through their intentions and easily deflected their attempts with a few words. Seeing that this tactic was ineffective, the Soviet diplomats immediately stepped forward, and the negotiations and bargaining began. Because the Soviet Union did not acknowledge Abel as a Soviet citizen, and the United States did not recognize East Germany as a sovereign state, Donner could not represent the United States and could only negotiate as a lawyer. This also increased the difficulty of the negotiations. The Soviet diplomat immediately proposed that Abel had been captured for 6 months, and only then did the United States propose an exchange of prisoners, indicating that the United States had already obtained a lot of information. However, the American pilot had not revealed anything. For fairness and justice, the US needed to release Abel first, and then the Soviet Union would release the American pilot 6 months later. Upon hearing this, Donovan immediately refused, demanding a one-on-one, face-to-face exchange. He also countered the Soviet diplomat, arguing that if the Soviets would only agree to the exchange, if the American prisoner revealed all the intelligence, then if Abel died in an American prison, the next captured Soviet spy would certainly reveal information to survive, because that would be the only way to be exchanged. He argued that prisoner exchanges could only be achieved through mutual trust. Donovan's response was flawless, and with his eloquent speech, he successfully persuaded the Soviet diplomat. But at that moment, Donovan suddenly proposed exchanging an additional American student. The Soviet diplomat decisively refused, stating that East Germany was not under Soviet control, and that Donovan should negotiate with the East German State Security Service. Unable to do anything else, Donovan contacted the East German diplomat, hoping they would release the innocent student. But East Germany wouldn't make a bad deal either. Immediately proposing conditions for the release, they demanded that the United States recognize East Germany as a sovereign state. The United States, of course, would not abandon its political stance for a worthless student. Donovan could only helplessly tell them that he was just a lawyer with no official capacity and was powerless in this matter. The negotiations ultimately ended on bad terms. Upon his return, Donald told the CIA agents everything about the negotiation results. The agents warned Donald again not to cause any more trouble. The US only needed to get their pilot back. Meanwhile, before agreeing to the prisoner exchange, the Soviet Union subjected the American pilot to various tortures in an attempt to extract classified data about the U-2 reconnaissance plane. But the pilot remained defiant, refusing to speak. Seeing that they couldn't get any information, and in order to rescue Rudolf Fabel, the Soviets had to agree to the US request for a prisoner exchange. exchange. The two sides agreed to the exchange on the Gili-Nick Bridge. Now Donald had leverage in the negotiations. He immediately contacted the East German diplomat and forcefully stated that if East Germany did not agree to the exchange, the US would stop all prisoner exchange operations, and the Soviet Union would inevitably vent its anger on East Germany. Caught in the middle, East Germany ultimately had to agree to release the student. With his superb negotiation skills, Donald successfully reached an oral agreement for a 1-for-2 exchange. The next day, both sides arrived at the Gili-Nick Bridge on time. To prevent any accidents, both sides had snipers hiding in the shadows. Donald walked to the middle of the bridge with Abel, but found that the American student to be exchanged was not there. The CIA, fearing further complications, immediately urged Donald to proceed with the exchange. Abel, learning that Donald was still waiting for another prisoner, turned and told the CIA agent,
"I can wait."
Abel only needed to take 2 more steps to regain his freedom, but he decided to risk the possibility of the deal falling through and continue waiting. Finally, East Germany delivered the student, and the two sides successfully exchanged prisoners. After returning to the Soviet Union, Abel ended his 30-year espionage career, was awarded the highest honor, the Order of Lenin, by the Soviet Union, and was promoted to Major General, serving as the director and instructor of the KGB. And Donald, because he successfully brought back the pilot, went from being a universally despised traitor to an American hero. Reality is indeed so surreal. This film is based on a true story. Donald and Abel, transcending politics and national boundaries, interacted with fairness and honesty, and ultimately achieved this impossible exchange.